And we are going to turn first to Her Excellency Aminath Shauna from the Maldives, because she's the head of the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Technology, as I just said. And the report points out that, surprisingly, interestingly, this is one of the areas where we find the lowest numbers of women at all levels. So we'd like to invite you, please, Your Excellency, to speak about how your experience can inform efforts to increase numbers of women in decision-making on the environment and climate change. And of course, to ensure that our response to climate change is gender inclusive and gender responsive. Over to you.
Thank you. And it's really a great privilege to be here on this panel today. And I was listening to the speakers and also the presentation and the findings of the report with keen interest as well. The Maldives is a very small country. In most maps, we probably don't even appear as a country. But we do have some interesting lessons and policies that we can share with the world, and not just in climate change, but also on gender issues. I'm one of the 6 female cabinet ministers out of total 18 in the Maldives. I'm the 2nd female environment minister in the Maldives, and also the 1st technology minister in female as well. Both climate change and technology and environment, they all go hand in hand. The climate change is an existential threat for the Maldives, and we are amongst the most vulnerable and low-lying nations in the world. 80% of our islands are less than a meter above sea level, making us particularly exposed to the consequence of sea level rise. Over 90% of our islands have reported flooding annually. 97% report shoreline erosion, and 64% of the islands experience severe erosion. 50% of all our housing structures are also within 100 meters from the coastline, and most cannot withstand tidal floods, let alone tsunamis. The reason why I just mentioned all these numbers is because 1/3 of the Maldives population live in the capital island in Male. The remaining 186 islands where the resident population are mostly women, children, and elderly. Most men have left to go to work either in Male or in resorts. Therefore, the consequences of climate change are really felt and observed, and they they experience the impacts of climate change, severe flooding, rainfall, and other natural disasters as well. Therefore, it's really critical to have women in leadership positions where they make decisions to make sure that we have policies that are gender sensitive in terms of our climate policies, as well as in response measures. In the Maldives, while the employed women are mostly more educated than men, women make up only 20% of decision making and in managerial roles. Similarly, women make up 62% of the civil service, but 61% of the posts at the executive level and above are held by men. So no surprise there in terms of what's happening in other countries as well. So to break the glass ceilings and to bring about organizational and cultural change, the Maldives has taken bold decisions to implement supportive measures and affirmative action to ensure equitable gender representation in leadership positions and governance. So in 2019, we amended our Decentralization Act to include 1/3 of elected councillors must be women. So just in last April this year, we held our first local council election since the amendment. And in 2020, only 6% of the local councillors were women. But today, since April this year, we have 39.5% of the elected councillors are women, which I believe this is a significant and very important step in terms of rising up to the challenge of addressing issues related to climate change and measures that we implement in terms of how we address climate change. This was also accompanied by training in areas such as project management and formulation for the newly elected representatives. We have also increased budgetary allocations for women's development committees, which were established alongside the local council. So the number of women who are at a local level making decisions and these policies have significantly increased due to this change. So since the severity of the storms have increased, the loss and damage from tidal swells and heavy rains, flooding really affect life at home. I think it's really important that the legislative change and policy changes that we have brought really reflect in terms of the changes that we bring about at a local level. Reflecting on the COVID-19 pandemic and its devastating impacts have really exposed women's vulnerabilities in the Maldives as well. Women were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in terms of employment, including through redundancy and complete loss of income and susceptibility to long-term unemployment. More women work in the informal sector than men, and twice as many women are employed in vulnerable work than men. In the face of dwindling resources as a result of the pandemic, women bore the brunt of the reductions in access to resources, including income, fishing, farming, as well as subsistence production. So to increase women's participation and foster entrepreneurship, the government also has earmarked 25% of the SME Development Finance Corporation loan portfolio to women. So therefore, for us, building back better really means resilient development, more participation of women. Under our gender action plan, we do intend to introduce gender responsive budgeting, and we are taking measures to desegregate data in our national data systems by gender, age, to support gender responsive planning and monitoring and evaluation of our programs. I am optimistic that these changes will help us in terms of and lead into increased gender responsiveness in our interventions on the ground, not only in our climate change projects, but in all our development initiatives as well.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and thank you for keeping to time. I would highlight, of course, that Minister Aminath Shauna has mentioned quotas, a very important tool, which we'll be hearing in a moment later on from Sandra Pepera about their usefulness.